Hello, this is Hamlet from the guild Elitist Jerks on the server Mal'Ganis with a gold challenge mode run of Siege of Neozao Temple. This is the second longest challenge mode. While some parts of this zone aren't hard, some parts are, and the sheer length of it combined with the fact that there are a number of different things that can trip you up and force a reset means it's probably one that you should do once you have some experience in challenge modes. The first and the third trash pulls each consist of 2 Guardians and 2 Amber Weavers. The Amber Weavers channel resin weaving on someone, which will stun them after 3 seconds if it's not either interrupted or dispelled. You'll want to make sure people interrupt them because the Guardians also cast something that needs to be dispelled, Malleable Resin, which slows somebody by 50% for 6 seconds. The Guardians can also put up a protective shield that reduces damage by 90%, so you'll have to move targets out of it. The second and fourth packs are these resin flakes. When they die, they explode, which does some damage to everyone in the group and puts a debuff on you that increases your damage done by 10% and increases your damage taken from resin flakes, including from the explosions when they die. So it starts to be more damage as you kill more and more of them. So we're going to keep our stacks of that as we go in and start DPSing the third pack, which is the same as the first pack. A comment on dispelling here. Because malleable resin is put on people more often than you can dispel, you have to triage dispels a bit. The usual rule for this is that if your dispel is up when someone gets it, you dispel immediately, but otherwise you just let it tick out and wait for the next one because you don't want to use a dispel and a debuff with only 2 or 3 seconds left. Now here we do something elaborate, which is pull the second pack of resin flakes, which has 10 flakes in it, and make sure to kill one of them quickly enough to refresh our stack. Now this means that the tank is already taking increased damage from resin flakes, and the group is taking a lot of increased damage from resin flake explosions each time they die. So if they just killed the last few simultaneously once we were above 10 stacks or so, everyone would just instantly die. Instead, people use defensive cooldowns, and I channel a Tranquility while they kill the last few one at a time to make sure we safely get up to 16 stacks, and then we immediately pull the boss with 160% increased damage. In hindsight, it may not have been worth the trouble since, as you're seeing now, the boss dies in 20 seconds, and with only 10 stacks of residue from the second flake pack alone, he would have died in 30 seconds, so it's not that big of a difference. And in fact, as it is, we wind up milling around for a few seconds after the boss because we can't decide whether it's safe to invis while the monk still has his Zuin pet out. I also sneak in a drink break while we're talking here, but that's not strictly necessary. I could have gone all the way to the RP before the second boss without a drink in this zone. We use the invis pot to skip only 2 packs. This clump of 8 resin flakes just outside the boss's room and a pack of 3 mantids a few yards beyond it. It's not that much, but there's no reason not to use it, and it brings our kill count for the whole zone to exactly 65. The 8 resin flakes would not actually have taken long to kill, so if you want to try skipping something else in the zone instead, that might work too. While you're invised, you can get broken out by touching one of the sap puddles that sprays out of the wall. That would cause a reset. We tried to avoid it by running down the right side of the hallway and jumping a lot in the hope that it would slightly reduce the chance of touching one. When we pop out of invis near the end of the narrow hallway, there's a pack of 5 resin flakes that's easy to kill while we're moving down this empty stretch towards another identical clump of 4 mantids to what we've already fought. We thought about using invis to skip some mobs higher up here on this path, but a problem is that the final pack of flakes is right next to the amber door, and you drop out of invis and aggro them while you're opening it. One way or another, you're going to want to kill 39 of the mobs that are in this first part of the zone before the amber door, at least if you're going to do the second half of the zone in the way we show later. This whole stretch between the first and the second boss is not very stressful at any rate. You just want to try to keep moving. In fact, the only thing that's been at all stressful for healing, or for anyone really, is that thing we did earlier on where we got 16 stacks of residue for the first boss. As soon as the tank aggroes this final pack of resin flakes, I'm going to run past them myself and open this door while people DPS them. I'm not actually sure why they went backwards a little. Really, everyone wants to move through the door the moment it's down and aggro the warden, because the faster you kill him, the faster you can start the gauntlet at the beginning of the second boss, and you can do it even while finishing off trash. I'm sure you could come up with an elaborate strategy where you kept these resin flakes alive and then gradually stacked up the buff and use it to kill the boss here. It would be a lot of work for some pretty limited value though, since all of the spawns that come during the gauntlet are essentially determined by time. The only point where you would gain value from added DPS is if you saved them all the way for the boss himself. The RP that comes after the warden dies is an easy time to drink up. You probably should have been able to make it this far in the zone without needing to so far. Pretty much the whole goal of the next 3 minutes is going to be to advance through the scripts and RP as fast as possible. It's one of the reasons this is an odd challenge mode. It's actually kind of easy and slow, and there's nothing you can do about it. The moment the NPC gives his taste of their own medicine line, you can talk to him in order to start the gauntlet. During the gauntlet itself, the only way you can advance it more quickly is by ringing the gong that you'll see behind me in a minute. Each time a wave of ads is finished spawning, which actually means it's going to be nearly dead because the DPS is waiting right there to pick them up at the stairs, you can run back and click the gong to start the next one. So you want to be ready to do it as soon as it becomes available every time. So I wind up having 3 jobs here for the next couple minutes. The first is standing at the very edge here and keeping hots on the tank. If you weren't a paladin, I'd probably have to watch him a little more, but I think it's going to be pretty easy at any rate. The second is throwing jars down. You can see we have a spot marked where I aimed the jars. And the third is going back and ringing the gong the moment it becomes available. You can see me spam clicking it. The first one is right after the line about the Amberwing. For the first pack of swarmers, the tank and melee DPS just know to stand the correct distance from the aim point for the jars such that the mobs are standing in the sap, but they're not. The second pack is demolishers, and we just had them back up to avoid any accidents where someone stands a bit too close to a demolisher explosion. The Amberwing has also appeared up top. He's not that big a deal. You can see I dodge him, but sometimes I don't even bother if I want to stay right at the edge to heal the tank or toss a jar or something. The demolishers die so fast that everyone's just waiting for the gong to be able to be rung again to start the next wave. This wave has a warrior which has a little more HP and does a little more damage, so it matters more to make sure that the sap is set up and positioned correctly and probably that you're ready to heal the tank a bit during the wave. Otherwise, the only thing you really want to do here is make sure you know the timing of when the gong becomes available again. I wind up missing it here since I didn't know exactly when it came relative to the various RP lines, and I'm staying at the edge a little bit just to make sure the tank is fine until we get a few more of the swarmers down and just the warrior is left. Right after that, I turn around to go ring it, and as you can see, it's already available. It would definitely be a worthwhile thing to check exactly when that happens. This whole stretch is so easy that the most important thing to do is to make sure you click the gong immediately, since that's what makes it end faster. And after that, it just becomes a little bit of practice of making sure you can handle the mobs correctly when they all come one right after another. The Amberwing shots are oddly harmless for something avoidable, which is fine. It just means that I don't have to worry about constantly repositioning right at the very edge of this cliff to find LOS on the tank. And you see just a few seconds after you can ring it for the final wave, the wave that includes everything, you can ring it once again for the one that summons the boss. And the boss will wind up running up the stairway while you finish off this last warrior. Once the boss is spawning, then I stop throwing jars down there, and we start making a pile of sap in the tank spot up here at the top level. The tank aggroes the boss before he runs back up the stairway, which means that the boss will come up here faster because, and you have to watch out for this, he can charge someone at the top level. Now, as long as you keep this boss tanked in sap, this charge he does frequently is the only threatening thing about it. If you're standing still at range when he charges you, it can knock you up in the air, and when he starts his whirlwind, you can be dead before you land. You want to be moving a little bit while the charge is on cooldown, and definitely be moving the moment he starts doing it if it's coming towards you. He has a steadily increasing frenzy that stacks up on him, but this is nullified as long as you frequently keep him standing in sap. When he starts his whirlwind, that not only nullifies a sap debuff on him, but it also erases any sap on the ground nearby. This is why we make sure to keep everyone but the tank away from the sap pile so we never have it wiped out. Our one melee DPS here spends most of his time running around dropping jars. There you can see the mage gets charged, and he wasn't moving, but he can blink out of it safely. So you have various options. I'm trying to be vigilant on people to hit a swift mend on them in between ticks of whirlwind, just in case it saves them if they take one extra. After that last one, I asked the mage to move a little to the right, just so we're nicely spread at range. The paladin tank is also ready to use hop on anyone who looks like they take a tick of whirlwind. It's just one of those things where we're already 8 minutes into this zone, so you just don't want to have someone die on a good run on an otherwise easy fight. I wind up using Heart of the Wild late here just because I'd been spending so much time being slightly nervous about some of this whirlwind positioning that I was focusing on it. He winds up dying pretty much instantly anyway with a few stacks of tar on him. Now, after the boss dies, you have about a minute until the door blows and you can advance in the zone. I get a nice chance to show off my legendary bug mount while we all ride down to the gate and wait. So this zone doesn't actually have more fighting in it than other typical challenge modes. It just has all this scripted RP stuff that bogs you down, and it kind of means it's one of the more annoying ones to learn because the attempts take longer and it's harder to practice the end of the zone. Which brings me to a point about challenge modes generally. I think it's a good habit to clear the entire thing on most of your practice runs until you're quite confident that you know all the pulls from the beginning to the end of the zone and how you're going to do them before you start really resetting every time something goes wrong when you think that any run could be a gold run. You'd much rather learn the whole zone at once while you're still in practice mode rather than trying to figure out various details at the end while you're doing what should be gold runs. Here at the last minute, I spontaneously hop onto someone's bike. I just had the thought that why have 5 potential points of failure when you could have 4 for riding past these upcoming patrols. The NPCs finally blow open the door. It's actually been over a minute since the boss fight ended. There's a static pull right in front of the door that you have to go around to the left of, and you can either wait on the near side of this tree and pass on the near side of that patrol of 3 mantids, or if they're right in front of you, you could go around the tree and around the other side of them. Just make sure the group's coordinated. Tauren on tall mounts sometimes have to dismount to get under that branch. After you're on the other side of it, it's easy to just ride straight up to the boss. Notice we still have 25 mobs left to kill. We're going to do 14 on the bridge to the final boss, and that means that we're going to do 11 during this boss fight. The logic simply being that the bombs during this boss fight do much more damage than anything you can do naturally, so you may as well use them to kill some trash. It does, however, wind up becoming one of the hardest parts of the zone. At the beginning, we position here in the corner to make sure we don't pull any of the trash before we're ready. All we have to do for the first part of the fight is dodge that blade rush. I never did get to see how much damage it does in challenge mode, but it's pretty easy to avoid. He does have one other ability which we never saw in this fight because we triggered the bomb phase before we used it, which is his Tempest. It does a lot of damage to everyone in the group and puts a shield on them that absorbs a lot of healing. But since nobody should be taking damage from anything else, it's pretty easy to just take all the time you need to heal it off. The most stressful moment for the healer and the tank is going to come right as the first bomb phase starts, when the tank has to round up 11 trash mobs and survive long enough for people to get CCs and stuns out and to kill them with bombs. At first, everyone hangs back here to avoid pulling the trash packs early. We generally want to delay as long as possible, so as soon as we start tanking them, there are a lot of bombs on the ground to use to kill them quickly. So we wait until the little adds are roughly getting to us, and then the tank goes and picks up a pack, and we misdirect one pack. We actually missed picking up that pack of 3 patrolling on the left for the first few seconds, which probably made things easier overall. For now, I'm just spamming on the tank. As soon as things calm down just a little, I should be trying to help out with bombs more, since that's what ends the phase more quickly and ends the boss more quickly. The bombs not only do damage and bring down the shield, but leave a debuff on him for the rest of the fight. There we finally pick up that last pack of 3 trash mobs. It's going to go down pretty quickly to the last rounds of bombs we toss, but it's going to be up for a little while after the big shield goes down, which is unideal from the tank's perspective. He's really getting pummeled here. Right there, my NS overheals him fully only because he LOH'd himself at the same time. So that was a pretty hectic tank healing moment, and as a result I wasn't helping out with bombs too much, but I will be the second time around. At the very least, the group got enough bombs onto him that as soon as the phase ended, he goes immediately into the second one. At this point, everyone just has to make sure not to die to a blade rush if he gets one off in the chaos in between phases, and to not to die to bombs. They do hit quite hard in challenge mode, and basically everyone just tries to toss as many as they can. By the time the second bomb phase ends, he should have enough debuffs on him that he dies only a few seconds after. Killing this guy with about 5 minutes left is a pretty good benchmark and should leave you with more than enough time for the bridge sequence and the final boss. As we get him really low, I'm going to move over to the bridge just so I can sneak in some drinking as soon as we get out of combat while the group moves up to pull the trash. It's always a good habit to think about that, being in the right position in advance of combat ending so you can take a few seconds of drink while people set up without having to hold anyone up. Here we're ahead on time. It's actually about 2 minutes to get across the bridge even without rushing too much, and 2 minutes to fight the boss, so the 5 minutes is more than enough. There are 2 types of mob on the bridge, builders and engineers. Builders just to have a random ranged physical attack that they toss at people. Engineers have 2 spells. One puts a dot called Burning Pitch on a person that you can dispel off, and the other is Crystallize, which stuns anyone who has Burning Pitch on them, and that slows you down. So people in general want to pay attention to the engineers and keep them interrupted, and you want to dispel Pitch if it gets onto anyone. These packs aren't hard, but it's also a bit hard to pull them together because the builders have their ranged attack, so it's hard to make them move, and it's kind of a pain to fight more than one engineer at once because there's a higher chance of people getting stunned. So we typically move up when we get the engineer down and then pull more mobs. I guess it's really the builder's reticence to move that makes it harder to go across the bridge more quickly, since really nothing at all here is too dangerous. While I wait for us to slog through this, I'll just talk about healing a bit. Since the first video I recorded, and after doing a few more challenge modes, I've reforged aggressively to full mastery, which is the best throughput stat for druids. By reforging everything I could, I got up to about 6,000 mastery while also keeping the haste breakpoint at 3043. That actually didn't wind up mattering this run because we don't have our elemental shaman for haste, but normally I like to have it. And all the reforging took me down to about 4600 spirit, which is just fine. It doesn't actually matter that much for challenge modes. Normally it's totally fine to go into challenge modes with your raid gear, but since they're what I've been focusing on for these few weeks, I figured I would reforge to the best stats for them. Similarly for trinkets, I'm using Zen Alchemist Stone and Shinshi's Polarizing Seal, both of which have either passive mastery or spirit that can be reforged to mastery and powerful int procs. You spend a lot of time power healing a tank in these things, so you want all the throughput stats you can get, especially for a class like Druid whose main way of spamming heals into a tank is an inefficient spell like Regrowth. Finally, down to these last 4 builders, we're getting ready to pull the boss. This last boss is pretty easy. I probably didn't even need a combat break here for mana, given that my Innervate is up and my potion is also going to be off cooldown, but I figured why not, just to be safe. I'll squeeze off an Amber right as we break combat, although in this case it almost made something really bad happen. So our tank swaps gear right as the fight starts, which drops him to half HP, and then for some reason I can't click off the Amber. I figured out later it was because of Taint in this UI mod, and then in his confusion over why I'm not healing him, he stands in a sap puddle, so it was almost kind of a disaster, and his LOH was on cooldown because he used it during the hard part of the third fight. So a few lessons there. One is to be careful swapping gear right before a fight, especially as a tank, because I think the challenge mode gear scale down makes you lose more HP than normal. And the other is for the healer, make sure to have a macro to cancel or a restorative amber. As long as you do that, it will work just fine in combat, and I made sure to make one right after this. The only thing to make sure about on this boss fight is that you know who's going to leave slightly early to charge across the bridge with some sort of speed buff and interrupt him. Here our mage did it. Ideally the healer would probably be a good person to go, but as a resto druid I don't actually have an interrupt, and we never did test if a stun like maim would have worked. Because of the confusion at the beginning, I wasted part of my Heart of the Wild in the first phase. Normally that would have been a nice place to help DPS a bit, although it actually hardly matters that much because the first phase goes by so fast that your DPS will have it down before Bloodlust is over. I'm also kind of bad about jumping enough to get rid of my quick dry resin here. That matters a little more for the DPS, whoever gets that debuff. If you jump enough to clear it off completely, then you wind up getting a 15% speed and haste buff for a little while. Once the boss is back to this end of the bridge, he's not going to take off again, and you can just finish off the fight. All in all, this was one of my less favorite zones, largely because it took longer than all the others without really packing in any more interesting or challenging things. Really, the only likely points of failure in this whole run were stacking up the resins correctly for the first boss, somehow messing up the second boss, like having someone handle Whirlwind wrong, accidentally aggroing Trash while we're riding to the third boss, or losing the tank during the hard part of the third boss. But for all those things, every time we wipe, we have to go through all those long minutes of scripting fights in RP. But with all said and done, here we're finishing them off with almost a minute to go. So I hope you enjoyed watching and found this helpful, and please give any feedback for anything you want to see included in future ones. And thank you for watching.